very much for tuning in to another episode with Real Solutions. I'm your host, Anna M. Aquino, and I am beyond honored to have the amazing John Finch with us today. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me, Anna.
And he's doing an amazing thing right now, and I'll let him talk about it in a minute. He is working on encouraging dads in the father projects, and there's a lot of things going on, and this is really critical that we have in our world right now. So what is your story? How did you God has gotten you to where you are today, and how did this become so passionate in your life?
Well, we've been very, very blessed. God and what He's done with me starting about 6 years ago, He really took me to a place of brokenness that I'd never been before. And I'd grown up without a dad, and it was in one of those moments of full surrender that my life was falling apart, and there were so many things going on. And I had been introduced a few years previous to that to this concept of a father wound. And I had a lot of struggles. I was a social alcoholic, traveling the country with an unlimited expense account, and my life was just a mess. And it was in this conversation I had with a friend of mine that I'd remembered and thought about many times, but not really dug into until this one day that God took me to my knees. And it was in that moment that I finally said, okay, I'm all in. My life is a mess, and there's so many things wrong, and I knew there was something to this idea of a father wound because my dad committed suicide when I was 11,
Wow.
and so for about 30 years I just struggled to find my way.
Wow.
I was just kind of lost, and I bought into everything that the world says you need to be as a man, husband, father, etc. And so God started me on this journey of finding forgiveness from my dad, and in really in the moment, about 3 months later, after that day, he showed me forgiveness from my dad, and it was in that moment that my life radically changed as a man, husband, and father. So in that, I had started sharing my story with various people, and everyone was coming back to me with a similar story or a story of their own. And so it was as a result of that God had just said, I've given you a story, now go tell it.
Amen.
Yeah, and so that kind of started the journey as far as making the film, The Father Effect, and I had no experience in making a film. I was not a filmmaker, but I had a couple of people just encourage me and said, hey, go get a good camera and start putting the word out. So we did, and we just started doing interviews, and we were very, very blessed with the opportunities to interview John Eldridge and Meg Meeker and some other high-profile people. So it was really an incredible journey.
Neat. And now, where can people find the film effect, the Father Effect?
So the film is at thefathereffect.com.
Okay, very cool, very cool. And I think I don't remember if I've discussed this with you before or saw something that I've discussed before, but there's this growing epidemic of the lack of the father figure in the home. I can't remember the stereotype anymore, but it's like the amount that we have two parents together, and at least in a functioning relationship, is like staggering. And I can't remember, when I was part of God Day, I was on something, and we were talking about this, and it was like, for people who grow up without a father, the risk of like everything, alcoholism, drug addiction, promiscuity, it just increases like sixfold. And our society doesn't want to accept that there's just this real father fracture, for a lack of a better word, going on in our culture. How all the stories that you get, how do you see what you're doing help that? Do you get some?
Well, yeah. So most people, just like me, I grew up in church, and I had never heard the concept though of a father wound, and so most people have no idea
Right.
that this issue, this root of their anger and addiction or whatever their problems may be, is a result of their relationship with their dad or lack of relationship with their father.
Right.
And so, for men specifically, there's a lot of angry guys, and I was one of those guys. and I medicated. I drank alcohol to cover up that wound, if you will. But
Mm-hmm.
it's everywhere. If you look at most of our social issues, whether it be teenage pregnancy, whether it be addiction, whether it be the prison inmate population.
Mm-hmm.
I was with a prison chaplain one time, and he said, John, you know, you say in your documentary 9 out of 10 have a father wound. He said in prison it's 12 out of 10. You know,
Wow.
he just said it is
Wow.
every man in here has some kind of issue. And so, yeah, as I began to really dig into this thing, I had no idea what an incredible epidemic that it is, and nobody's really talking about it. Nobody really digs
They're not.
into it and tries to address the issues. And so, what we're seeing is, and the response we get from the film is just overwhelming. I mean, God's doing just some amazing things through the film, and we address so many of these various messages and struggles and issues in the film.
That's so cool. I think too that people think, well, my dad is this or my dad is this. You don't have to have a biological father to be able to heal that wound. A lot of times people think, well, my dad, in your case, your dad was gone. What are some of the stories? I know that I've talked about like pastor and even some things with my husband. I have an amazing dad biologically, but in the things of the spirit, I needed a spiritual, somebody who was ready to just tell me to keep flaming forward, and God provided that in my life. So, a lot of times, when you're doing this, you're raising up men to be that for other people. So, do you have a lot of guys that come to you and say, "What do I do and where do I start?"
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think most men, they want to be great fathers. They
Mm-hmm.
do. They just don't know how
Yeah.
because it wasn't modeled for them. And most people think of an absent father as a physically absent father.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll tell you, another big piece of that is the dad that lives right there in the home that chooses to do other things rather than spend time with his kids and engage and be involved with them. So there's that emotionally absent father. Um, so yeah, I have guys come to me all the time, and a lot of the resources that we're now developing, is we're trying to give those men the practical steps. Not, don't give me five principles. Give me things that I could do every day
Yeah.
that help me become a better dad and a better husband.
Yeah. We were just, my husband and I last night were talking to my oldest daughter who's 15, and we were trying to explain to her that socially, in generations past, men didn't, it wasn't encouraged to say, I love you. It wasn't encouraged to have emotions. Men were the providers, and she was just blown away by this. She had no concept, and I'm glad she had no concept of it. But it was like, what? That's crazy. I said, yeah, babe, I know it's crazy, but this is how a lot generations of men were raised, and now they've come and said, that's nuts. you know, we need to be able to put our arms around our children and say, I love you, and you
Yeah,
have value.
it's really, really interesting the number of grown men, I mean in their 50s and 60s, that have said, my dad never said I love you or
That's
never
crazy.
said I'm proud of you. And that was a lot of it was a generational thing.
Mm-hmm.
You had that generational curse that gets passed down from generation to
Yes.
generation, and you had a generation of men who came back from war,
Yep.
and their main focus was going out and providing for their family.
Yep.
And so that's the way they thought that they should do it. They
Mm-hmm.
didn't understand that they also needed to be engaged at home and engaged, on the home front, doing some things there also. And most people I talk to that tell a story about I love you, it's why he didn't say I love you, but I knew he loved me because he provided.
Mm-hmm.
And that's great. That's what we're called to do. As men, we're called to provide for our families. But there's also some additional things that we need to do there. And it's the I love you. I'm proud of you.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, all those I believe in you. All of those affirmations that kids need. And if they don't get them, they're going to go look for them somewhere. Whether it be in a little girl, she's going to go look for a man's love.
Yep.
And a lot of times it leads to that promiscuity. In my case, I was looking for affirmation from other men, so I was the good time Johnny getting drunk and being crazy. That was my way of trying to get it.
Mm-hmm. So, what are some of your testimonies that you get? I'm sure you get many of them that just what you're doing has really affected them. So, what are some of your testimonies?
We've had some amazing stories. There was one that just came out about the full length film about a girl who just said, I had no idea what my issues were until I watched your film.
Wow.
And your film literally was life changing for me. So it made her really understand the relationship or lack of relationship with her father and the behavior that was related to it. A lot of women specifically
Mm-hmm.
uh, tell these stories about being promiscuous, about looking for that father's love because they didn't get it from their dad.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, God is doing just some amazing work through the film, and even through our short film. We released a short film, 15 minutes, about it's been 3 years ago, and we get literally emails every day about what God continues to do with it. So it's been amazing.
Amen. As my heart with this show, a lot of times I say is, God has a plan for everybody's life. And the difference in what you're doing is you've affected people's lives because you got up and you started to do something with it. You had this passion that God birthed in you. And I want all of my listeners to hear this. Get up off the couch, get off of your tush, and do what God's telling you to do. And it's amazing the kind of impact you can make in our world. It's so easy. A lot of times we can say, but God, send someone else, send someone else. But God's calling you. Will you do it? Will you do the things that He has in your heart? And you just know that this is what you're called to do. So I want
Yeah,
you, go
no,
ahead.
no, no. I was gonna say, I'm the biggest knucklehead there is, and so if God can use me in some way, form, or fashion, I'm telling you, there's hope for everyone. So
Absolutely.
it really is. It's what God gives you a purpose and a passion, and obviously this is my mission in life.
Absolutely.
But it really is just a matter of, man, whatever He's calling you to do, go for it because you've got Him behind you for sure.
Absolutely. So if there's anything else you want to add before we end this?
Oh, so Encouraging Dads, you mentioned that
Yes.
briefly.
Mm-hmm.
The Encouraging Dads project we started actually came out of the film because so many of the men I was talking with felt beat down and beat
Wow.
up and like they weren't good enough, etc. And so, literally, me and a friend of mine, we were just talking one day, and I thought, man, I want to figure out something we can do to help just love and support, encourage dads.
That's
And
great.
that's really where that came about. And so it's a website where people that are bloggers, writers, authors, whatever can go, and we're just asking them to do a 500 word or less or around 500 words, just an encouraging story about a dad, a mentor, a coach, a father figure, whoever, just so we can continue to put great stories out there and make dads feel encouraged and inspired to become better dads.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Thank
And
you. Thanks for
and
having me.
thank you, my watchers, and I want you all to remember that God has awesome plans for your life. So you better start getting excited. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.